Hello, my name is Brian Cooper. I'm a graduate student at Northern Michigan University in the Exercise Science program. Today we're going to be talking about energy systems and how they relate to exercise and physical activity. When we're talking about energy systems, what we're basically trying to say is how the body is the process in which the body is undertaking to create energy. And whenever you're talking about physical activity, it is actually the greatest demand for energy transfer in the body. And the body utilizes energy for everything, cellular level, all the way to muscle contraction. But when you're thinking about physical activity, the thing that comes to mind for myself is work. And energy is a prerequisite for performing physical work during training and competition. So thus we can say energy provides capacity to work. So where does this energy come from? It comes from ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Just a little background, adenosine triphosphate is made up of one molecule of adenosine and three molecules of phosphate. This is converted from macronutrients and stored in muscles or the cell. Its potential energy within this ATP powers all cells energy requiring processes. So this can range from nerve transmission, muscle action, circulation, tissue synthesis, digestion, granular secretion. So as you can see, the body needs energy for everything. Today, we're going to be focusing on muscle action because physical activity, competition, sports need muscles. Muscles need to do work to complete whatever your goal is. Okay, and so how do we get energy from ATP? As one phosphate bond is broken, causing ATP coupled with H2O, an enzymatic here, this equation, ATP is split, forming ADP plus PI. Energy is released. So this is where we're getting the energy. It results in 7.3 kilocalories per mole of energy. And one thing to remember is that ATP does have limited stores in the muscle. Only 80 to 100 grams are actually stored in the muscle. So this is good for very short durations, but as activity or sport keeps going along, the body needs to find a way to resynthesize ATP. The body replenishes ATP stores by any three energy systems: phosphagen, ATP PCR, glycolytic, or oxidative. First one we're going to talk about is the phosphagen system. This is kind of defined by high intensity, short duration activities. Anaerobic, which is without oxygen. And so we kind of can draw this conclusion from what we just talked about ATP, how it's high energy, released quickly without oxygen. And it's three basic reactions that are used in the processing of ATP. One we've already talked about. One is when we couple PCR with ADP, and phosphate and creatine split. Phosphate is is then added to ADP, and we have ATP, which can then be resynthesized for energy in this equation. And then finally, the third one, we have two ADPs, ADP. When those split from phosphagen, we get a phosphate and adenosine. And then the phosphate couples with one of the ADPs, and we get ATP and then AMP. So these are the three processes. As we discussed before, they're very small, not a lot of storage. So these, like I said, these energy systems are very short, about 10 seconds. Once you start hitting about past 10 seconds, 20 seconds, we start getting the glycolytic stage. But really got to remember that there's kind of a taper between all the energy systems. There's never just one actually working. It's important to remember when you're talking about phosphagens is they replenish fairly quickly. Phosphagen takes 3 to 5 minutes after exercise is complete restoration. For PCR, it's about 8 minutes after completion of exercise. So your body does replenish the stores for this very quickly. This can be helpful in knowing correct durations for breaks between activities when you're training, or during games if you're kind of monitoring shifts of athletes. The next stage is glycolytic system. This we can define by activities that last from 20 seconds to about 2 minutes. And again, this is an anaerobic system. A couple activities, 20-meter dash, 40-meter dash, alpine skiing. Most team events will fall into this category. Sports such as hockey, basketball. And then another thing is, we brought it before, there's always kind of a mixture of energy systems and activity. So even after the end of a mile, which could take 7 to 8 minutes, you are going to utilize the glycolytic system for a sprint at the end of it. This system is run by breaking down blood glucose in glycogen stores. And this is done through a process called glycolysis. And when we're talking about glycolytic system, it usually refers to fast or rapid glycolysis, which will result in the formation of lactic acid instead of pyruvate at the end of glycolysis. This is just kind of a small diagram of glycolysis. And glycolysis is generates energy from glucose. It's a series of 10 enzymatically controlled reactions creates at the end 2 molecules of pyruvate. And then, like I said before, in fast glycolysis, this pyruvate is then forms lactic acid when hydrogen is released during glucose breakdown. Glycogen, the glycolytic system uses glycogen in blood glucose stores. So we know that these are directly related to carbohydrates in your body and diet, how you take them in. So it's safe to assume that if you have a low carbohydrate diet, it is going to affect your body's ability to produce energy from the glycolytic system. And once again, restoration for glycolytic system is going to be a little bit longer, usually 20 to 24 hours for total restoration in the body for glycogen system. Next, we have the oxidative system. This system is very kind of similar to glycolytic in that it can use blood glucose, muscle glycogen, but it also goes a step further, uses fats and proteins. And as you can see, kind of a theme going on here, as we change from system to system, the duration is getting longer. And that again is the body's ability to continuously produce ATP because it constantly needs ATP for energy. Aerobic system works usually supplying oxygen in the muscles between 2 minutes and 3 hours. So there is a broad duration for the oxidative system. Some activities are triathlon, boxing, cross-country skiing, cross-country running, long-distance track events, and sports like soccer, even sports where the glycolytic system is kind of the main contributor to energy. The oxidative system will come into play, such as basketball and hockey, and kind of sports where the shifts are short duration, but over a long period of time, couple hours. So it's important to, again, remember that these systems are interrelated. There's not just an off switch where they kind of, one goes from phosphagen to glycolytic to oxidative. There's an overlapping, if you will, of the systems. Components of an aerobic metabolism are the citric acid cycle, electron transport, and oxidative phosphorylation. And so, to tie this together, we know that glycolysis breaks down blood glucose and muscle glycogen, and at the end of that we get pyruvate. Pyruvate irreversibly converts to acetyl-CoA, which forms acetic acid. And after this process, the acetyl-CoA will enter the citric acid cycle to produce then the citric acid cycle degrades the acetyl-CoA substrate to carbon dioxide and hydrogen atoms within the mitochondria. ATP forms then when hydrogen atoms oxidize during electron transport, oxidation, phosphorylation. And then, so that's how carbohydrates, blood glucose, muscle glycogen. The fats, fatty acids enter the citric acid cycle through beta oxidation. And we get this too from when we take glycogen, glycogen, and you add free fatty acids, you get triglycerol, which is then converted through beta oxidation, and then cycled into citric acid cycle for ATP. Usually, when we're talking about oxidative system, primarily it'll be carbohydrates and fats. As you can see down here, at rest, 70% of ATP from fats, 30% from carbohydrates. And as intensity increases, the use of carbohydrates will increase and fats will decrease. So it really just depends on intensity and duration for what macronutrient you are using to produce energy for the oxidative system. And once we tend to go further in duration of activity, and these stores of glycogen kind of decrease, we'll dip into protein, and we get energy from protein. It converts or through deamination and removes the nitrogen from the amino acid molecule, and that then converts to pyruvate, or it can be the acetylcholine or accepted right into the citric acid cycle. Here's just a quick picture of how we can get ATP from the oxidative system. As you can see, glycolysis, pyruvate, acetylcholine, kind of go into the Krebs or citric acid cycle. Don't really see beta oxidation over here, like electron shuttle, electron chain, and oxidation phosphorylation. Okay, why is this important? We can use our knowledge of energy systems to classify sports in a bioenergetic way by duration, intensity, and fuel used. This can help in making performance models, which pretty much is what it sounds like, is a model of what you're going to use or what you need to be successful in a certain sport. And then from that you can create an effective training program for a specific sport, which nowadays, is the higher you get in levels, the more specific your training can be, usually the better your performance will be. So, as we went over before, your knowledge of the kind of time frame and what your body is using during the energy systems, and then the duration of restoration, you can develop a training program that is targeting the certain systems using optimal rest periods, so you can specifically train an energy system. And also, it's important to remember that there is there's a connection between all three energy systems. This table right here is just kind of gives you an idea. The duration, right here we have the duration of the activity, ranging from 10 to 240 seconds. And then over here it gives us a percentage of the anaerobic and aerobic systems being used. And as you can see, there's always an aerobic and an anaerobic system being used. So it's safe to assume that we can use training, specific training that we would think targets an energy system like sprints. We know that there's an 8-week sprint, in a study. In a study by Bertuzzi, that's wrong study. In a study by Bartlett, they wanted to test the improvement of sprints after an 8-week sprint training program. And at the end of the training program, they completed these sprints 2 to 3 times per week. And at the end of it, there wasn't really an increase in anaerobic capacities, but what they found was an increase in aerobic VO2 peak, which we could assume, or then from that we can draw that aerobic metabolism can play a role in the of anaerobic systems, like recover faster. So it's important to know. So it's things like that where you can tie these together that can help you make a better performance or create a better training program to increase performance, because as athletes, that's what we're looking for when we get right down to it. Some things to remember though is although we can fairly easy and accurately, not, I should say easy, but we can accurately assess aerobic energy release through VO2. You can see here, aerobic energy release from combustion of carbohydrates and fats is readily quantified, as there is a direct relationship between the oxygen uptake, VO2 measured at the mouth, and the whole body aerobic production. On the other hand, however, there is not a direct mechanism for the anaerobic process. There are several different ways that we can attempt to measure the anaerobic system, such as blood lactate samples. There's actually some mathematical equations you could get into, but there is no consistent there is no consistency throughout literature on a process to accurately define anaerobic measurements. According to Gaston, measures of changes in muscle substrate, metabolites, and accumulated oxygen deficit combined with measures of VO2 can be used to proportionize energy contribution. And so, though we can't get an absolute number, we can use systems like this to get an idea. If we go back to this, the proportion of the system being used. So you can make an educated guess, though it's not going to be an exact. Finally, and then one thing to be careful of, as I said, when using a mathematical equation, and then when you want to get into, when you're talking about thresholds, again, we have to be careful, because recent research has been showing that threshold may be not the best. Anaerobic threshold, when they talk about anaerobic threshold, might not actually describe anaerobic work. In a study by Bertuzzi, when they tested sprint times, when they were doing a test on incremental sprint tests, they found that aerobic system corresponded to 93% of total metabolic demand, and glycolytic, the glycolytic system was only about 7% of metabolic demand at speeds corresponding to anaerobic threshold. So that's important to note, that that you can't always, again, easily define an anaerobic process. One easy way to kind of tell when you're dealing with glycolytic or oxidative is lactate accumulation. Like I said earlier, when you get into glycolytic, the fast glycolysis will produce lactate, and so we can assume that the higher the lactate accumulation, the higher the intensity of the activity, the more glycogen or glycotic energy system is being used. So, to bring it all back together, like I said again, being able to understand the process of each energy system, what they use to generate the energy, and durations, intensities, again, allows an athlete and a coach to develop a better understanding of how they need to work, or a smarter way to work to increase their performance in sport and activity. So with that being said, I hope you learned something from this presentation. Here's my reference page. So have a good day.